On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Zeeshan Khadim. He is the head of security at Panther Labs. We're going to be talking about how security can plug into the engineer's workflow. And we're going to be covering some good examples as to how you can share different parts of the technical capabilities of the company so that, we're working with similar tool sets, talk about how we're moving away from the quote unquote plug and play. I'm excited to have Zeeshan on to talk about this. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amr. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's start at the top. Let's have everyone understand what Panther Labs does. And then as the head of security, what are some of your responsibilities?
Sure. So in short, Panther is a cloud-native threat detection platform. And our goal is to make security operations painless. Our goal and how we achieve that goal is ingesting large amounts of log data, processing it, giving you the capability or giving the users the capability to write detections on top and really surface the alerts that matter. My role here at Panther as head of security, the security organization is responsible for keeping our customers' data secure, providing detection content to our customers. We are responsible for helping our employees make the right decisions and do the right things in a way that they're able to maintain their level of productivity while moving fast without security being a bottleneck.
Awesome. And I guess, when we were talking about what this episode would be around, I said, we don't want to talk about the hypothetical of shifting left. We want to talk about some of the tactical stuff that's happening. And I think you came up with some great talking points that we're going to cover. And I think one thing we were talking about was plugging into the engineer's workflow. I guess at a high level, when we're typically dealing with security, and obviously there's a perception that security is a little bit of the no police, and I know it takes time to change that. The perception is that security adds overhead, right? I mean, I think that's maybe it's an unfair perception, but I mean it is the perception. Is that? Do you think that's accurate? Do you think it's unfair? What are your thoughts?
I think it depends on how the company both culturally and technically views security. When we think about a product that we're offering to a customer, do we think just in the context of these are the features we will offer? But I think a core offering of a product is also the security and the privacy that we offer to the customer. So when we start thinking about security that way, the cultural aspect that the perception shifts from thinking of security as an overhead to thinking of security as a core value proposition as well as a feature for the end users. And that allows for security to not be an add-on when you're thinking about new features, but is a core part of what your design looks like, who should be involved in that process, how does your product grow from idea to development to delivery to end customers.
Absolutely. Well, I like the way you put that as a feature, and I think you're right that when you do view it that way, I think data teams are starting to look at data as product, and I think they are also now having these conversations, and the roadmap is shifting of when you start thinking about security, privacy, data. In the case of security, when you are thinking about, all right, it is a core part of the product. I expect that. I mean, we don't talk about it because the features are what I'm seeing, but I expect you to be secure, private. I don't want my information hacked all over the place. So when you sit down and you're trying to talk to the product team and establish the roadmap and the security features and the privacy features, how really should it be? And obviously different size organizations, different timings, but in an ideal world, what would you do?
There are two ways that I think I'd answer this, not necessarily in terms of the time. I think what you want to do is empower the users to be able to think about what are the questions to ask in terms of what the implications from a security point of view would be. So that starts from the design phase. That starts when they have an idea and they're thinking about how this will translate into an actual working product or a solution or a feature. So empower your users and your product teams that way. The other way, when we think about when to involve the security team, it doesn't have to be right at the start. Like, it's tempting to say involve us right when you're starting to think about something. I think it's really important to think about the challenges that will come with that, both in terms of scale and visibility. There's no way, if you want to put a human security engineer in that process, you will scale. So that's where the aspect of empowering users to self-guide, make those decisions themselves when we should go deeper with the security team. And that may come at the design phase, depending on how you went down the list of questions, or that might come down at the code review phase. It might, and as we go during this conversation, we'll talk about how we can automate some of that process even further. So to answer your question, that's a long way of answering your question, is empower your users in a way that they can start a project or start something with security in mind, that they don't feel that they have to go and talk to somebody. Empower your users to do that way. And then based on what they are working on, how they have gone through your preliminary assessment, engage at an appropriate time, and that will be different for different use cases.
Absolutely. I mean, that's great advice, and I think some of what we're going to be talking about, is based on security has now a team. There's a presence. It obviously, I like the fact of empower users to start with security in mind. Know that it is something that's coming. Maybe not. It's and it might not be there now, but you should be thinking about it. I guess as you see a product with security components built out, that's one thing. You brought in sometimes, and you are establishing a team. You're establishing a security culture. That's another. But I guess sometimes when you're really looking at that, either way, you're coming in and you're going to be asking other teams that maybe necessarily aren't completely on your direct reports to you, to do things, to have activities, to take responsibilities, per the guidelines you've set. And all of a sudden, this matrix component is, when we look at it, and we were talking about, it's not overhead. You're asking potentially for people to do more work, though.
That's correct, and that's a good point as well. And I think, so one of the key things from a security team, when we go to some other teams, and either, let's say, a vulnerability has come, or a report through a bug bounty program has come, and we go to a developer team and we want them to address that. If you make everything critical, then nothing is critical. So it's really important that before we send this, or before we send the findings of a test that we may have done internally, review that, triage that, see what are the things that really matter. And to really understand what really matters, it's important for the security organization or the security team to understand what their environment looks like. What are the crown jewels that we are protecting? Where are the risks? How far along are we to managing those risks, either through mitigation or elimination? And what our prevention posture looks like. So building that understanding up helps triage things better, helps narrow things down to what really matter, and then taking that to the teams that you're working with. So taking a little bit of that, putting that onus on you a little bit for that initial triage before you send things over to the other team. Says, okay, now the security team is coming to us. I've seen that they don't just file 100 tickets where everything's just marked as a critical. This must be really important. That's one aspect of it. Obviously, there are other parts like that, like I talked about, which are more cultural in nature, where how do we think about security in general? But tactically speaking, this is something that I found to be very valuable.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting, because I think what you mentioned was to understand what the crown jewels are, what you should be protecting, because basically what I'm hearing is not every security concern is going to go top of the list. You can't give a list of 100 things and say they're all the top priority, whatever your priority nomenclature is. You have to have a priority list, and the security team really has to understand what that core is. I guess when you're looking at that, and you're going to the team, and you're starting to involve somebody else to to help tackle these issues. Obviously, when we're talking about plugging into the engineering workflow, the most ideal scenario is, they're not going to have to deviate too far to deal with what they need to deal with. And obviously, if you've done the triage and they have something very concrete to work with, sounds like that's probably an ideal way. But when you're looking at, hey, these capabilities plugging into the engineering workflow, like what does that actually mean? Like plugging into the engineering workflow, what would that mean to you?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like I think that is key. And one of our strategic operating principles as a team is that we are looking to address the root cause that addresses an entire class of issues or vulnerabilities or risks. So treating the root cause rather than the symptom. A basic example could be that you're repeatedly seeing something not match the security baseline. And every time it doesn't, you go file a ticket for it, get it fixed. But the way we would like to operate is figure out why it's happening in the first place and then addressing that. What does that look like in an example or a real world example? A lot of the teams now, most companies now, are using infrastructure as code. And one example that's worked really well for us is, a company using Terraform or Pulumi or something else, whatever their platform of choice is. They're deploying infrastructure, AWS, GCP, whatever it might be. You want to follow some best practices. Don't make your buckets public. That shouldn't be public. Or don't have overly provisioned IAM roles. What we can do is, instead of alerting on them later on when they're in production and then following up on those, this is where plugging into the developer workflow comes, is leverage capabilities that these tools provide, like Terraform Sentinel or Pulumi CrossGuard, and build out your policy checks that say, if as a person is writing their infrastructure code, it gets evaluated against that policy and they get warned about it early on. You can, you get the flexibility of warning or blocking. So things don't get into production in the first place. And that's what really takes us into plugging into developer workflows.
Interesting. And I guess, that certainly sounds like, also when you're talking about triaging, if you are getting the alert earlier, then hopefully, as you mentioned, the developers in their workflow, they're seeing issues, they can address it in real time. The one thing that's interesting to me is context switching. If you see the issue and you're dealing with it versus coming back to it, the impact is massive, just because you don't have to go back and re-understand what the situation is, where in the code, all that kind of stuff. I guess when you're looking at that, how much of, like, when you're evaluating security, solutions, security processes, how much of it are you looking at what the team's currently working with and going, how can I best use those existing tools before you try to introduce something maybe?
I think when we're thinking about tooling, the way we've started to think about it is really in terms of capabilities, not just in terms of features or a tool that might say, hey, we'll fix everything. What you also want to take a look at is the level of investment that might need to go to make the tool work more effectively. So coming back to what I talked about earlier around like challenges with scale and visibility, every new tool is also going to add some operational overhead on the security team to run and to manage it. And the more disparate your tools become, the harder it's going to get to collectively use them as well. You might want to use data from those multiple tools together to be able to make better decisions. So I think before we get into something like that, those are the kind of questions we would ask is, well, what is the capability that we are missing, that we need, rather than what is the feature we are missing that we need, and why do we need that capability? And going back to our strategic operating principle of let's try and address root causes rather than symptoms, where does it help with that? So those operating principles help us make these decisions as we go.
Interesting. I guess when you're I like how you actually, said, when it comes to tooling, ask what capabilities the team is missing. When it comes to tooling, obviously you're looking and evaluating what various teams could possibly benefit from in moving the alerts early in the process, as you mentioned. When it comes to your team and looking at tooling, and obviously not every team on the security side is software engineering oriented yet. It's more maybe a little bit of that older plug and play. Having tools that do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. How does a team that needs to upskill their security team to take advantage of the tooling go about that? I don't know if that's a thing for every company, but I'm sure there's companies that would love to take advantage, but also they realize their skill sets also need to kind of progress to do that.
Yeah, I think it depends on the capability you're looking for and the use case you're trying to address. For example, if you're looking to do MFA, get one of the larger SSO providers, or get Duo. They make it really easy to do it out of the box. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But when you're thinking about certain things like detection and response, but that's a good example where nothing's going to come plug and play. Tools or vendors are not going to know what your environment looks like, or tools that provide capabilities such as here's what your posture looks like. Well, okay, I know what my posture looks like, but what is it that is really valuable, and what is it that I really want to defend? That's where the security engineering teams need to kind of move to that aspect of what more engineering focus is. How do we make sense of all of this data? What is it that we really care about? So taking that example of like detection as code, which we do in our team internally with Panther, is you think about it is the same concept that if we are triaging things before we send it to other teams, not everything is critical. We want to apply the same concept to ourselves. We don't want to overload ourselves either. So we optimize for what are the highly relevant log sources. We know that based on whatever environmental context we have, what are the things we really care about. We want to write rules that are effective, that lead to actionable results. So we apply the same concepts of like a developer workflow, such as testing. So we do testing initially to look for the syntax. We test for the logic that it is going to alert on the things we expect it to alert. And then we test on historical data. And then you go through your staging and production rollout, however that might look like. So now that workflow has taken, it has taken something that you might previously just say, I'm interested in everything from this IP address to say, I'm interested in this event that is happening, and an IP address just might be one signal of that. There might be other artifacts that I want to talk about, and then go through the process of testing it, developing it, and rolling it out in your production.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly, as I'm listening to you, I'm picking up a couple of clear, takeaways. Your team understanding their priority of security. I mean, it goes without saying, but truly understanding which of those, because obviously if you understand the root around those, your downflow channels are going to be a lot simpler, because you impact a lot of the various aspects you've mentioned. I guess the one question I was going to ask you is, when your team is kind of going through the process of, working with the engineering teams and helping, let's say, take advantage of capabilities within infrastructure, tooling, Terraform, what it might be, and you're working with them, at some point, is there a notion that your team actually could develop some of those capabilities and do the work, or would that be a little bit challenging, because obviously there still is an engineering team and having them do it? And I know DevSecOps is coming about for a variety of reasons as well, but are some of those capabilities best in the hands of certain engineering teams and not in security potentially?
I think it really depends on the makeup of your security team and your engineering organizations. I think in some cases it may make sense to share that that workload in order to move fast. I think what's important is to have clear roles and responsibilities and ownership for long-term maintenance of these things. But in terms, there may be cases in order to move fast, the security team comes in. I do believe in the fact that, as we move to more engineering-focused security teams, we aren't just coming with, here's a policy, go implement it. We want to come with capabilities that say this will help implement these policies, and this is how we do it. And that's plugging into the developer or the engineering workflow doesn't necessarily just mean, again, here's a policy, we want to move it earlier in the process, please figure it out. No, here's how we do it, here's a template. So speaking of templates, that's a good example where a security team can immediately contribute. If you're familiar with whatever is being used as infrastructure as code, write a template that's reusable. Or on the application security side of things, write frameworks, reusable frameworks that will make sure that your developers aren't going to introduce the common application security errors. So that's what I really mean by come with capabilities that help your developer teams. And how that functions in who's doing what aspect, I think that will depend on the organization.
Absolutely. I guess you mentioned engineering. There's an engineering footprint in everything now, whether it's everything is a specialized form of software engineering, whether it's the data side has data engineering that pretty much is software engineers who deal with data. You have DevOps is pretty much become the same thing, platform engineering. Within security, I guess as you're kind of seeing engineering take hold, I guess how quickly is that coming about, and how does that impact, I guess, typical teams?
I think for security in general, it's still a data problem. The types of data and the volume of data, they are growing exponentially with the move to cloud infrastructures being able to be scaled up really quickly, more SaaS products being used. So now your data is not just increased in volume, but it's now distributed across multiple platforms that may or may not you may or may not be able to correlate data against. So you need platforms where you're able to do so. From a security engineering perspective, similar to those other functions you mentioned, it is a data. I wouldn't say a data problem, but it is at the core of it is the data.
Yeah, and I mean, within the security space, I don't know what the figures are. I'm sure they're staggering. The volume of data being captured with all the cloud, not only the cloud, data points, but also all the mobile devices. I mean, everything that's you guys can capture to discern, that's got to be staggering.
Absolutely, which is again why it's really important to think about what are your high value logs. What is the high value or relevant data that you care about? It's very easy to just drown in a lot of data.
Absolutely. Well, Zeeshan, I appreciate your time. This has been awesome. I'd like to ask guests, if in a future episode somebody could either answer a specific question or cover a topic for you, if there's something you'd like to hear about.
I think something that I would be interested in learning is, those who have come from an experience where they've started up programs, security programs. What are the lessons they've learned that they would share with somebody like myself who is going through that process right now?
Awesome. No, that's actually a good one. I'm sure there's especially when you're building up a program, either very early stage or from scratch. There's a lot of different choices to be made. I'm sure there's a lot of lessons learned there. So that's a good one. If somebody wants to reach out to you to talk about anything you said on the podcast, what is a good way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can share my LinkedIn profile, or I'm fairly easy to find.
Okay, we'll make sure that URL is on the show notes. So if anyone does have a question, they can reach out to you. Thanks again for being on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Amar. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, if you know someone or you yourself would like to speak about the lessons learned in building up a security program, either from scratch or super early stage, I'd love to have you on to talk about that. And if the podcast is useful, if you like it, share it. Put a review into Google or Apple or whatever platform you listen to. That's how all these podcasts distribute it. And that's kind of how we've gotten to grow. And I appreciate everyone who does that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.